Welcome back to the next episode of Modern Times Podcast. We have Sarah again.
Hello.
And Anne, of course.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about Chaplin's leading ladies. Charlie's Angels, as I guess we could call it. That's just too perfect to not use.
Yes.
But before we get rolling into that, Anne and I attended a Chaplin event within the last few days in Sarasota, Florida. And Anne, why don't you tell us more about how that went?
Dan Kamen, who I've seen before, I seen him a couple of years ago, and he did his show Funny Bones. And I was such an admirer of him. He's just fantastic, and he's such an expert in Charlie Chaplin's artistry. And he wrote a book, a one-man show in 1984, and then Comedy in Motion in 2008. So I've talked about him, and I was talking about I was going to go see his Funny Bones in Tampa. And then I found out that he was going to do kind of like a lecture in Sarasota, and they were going to be showing Chaplin shorts. And I mentioned it to Nigel because I know that he kind of lives, about an hour away, but you live in that area. And we went there on the 19th, and Dan introduced 4 of Charlie's films that you don't normally get a chance to see, which was Kids Auto Race, The New Janitor, 1 a.m., and what was that last
Easy
one?
Street.
Easy Street, yes. And then we had the great fortune afterwards to sit and actually talk with Dan, and it was just great to sit and just be able to ask questions, and a fantastic night. And and it was great seeing Nigel, and we're hoping that Dan will come on and, speak here on the podcast, because I just think he's so interesting.
It was cool before he came out to do his presentation. They showed a little backstory video on him, and he's an extra in Chaplin the movie with Robert Downey Jr. He plays one of the Keystone cops in the scene when Charlie shows up to Keystone and Sennett says that he's too young. That he does that little cigarette bit.
Right.
One of the cops was Dan Kamen. And I think he's also in Benny and June as well.
That wouldn't surprise me.
And something, Nigel, that I thought was so fantastic, and it also makes me a little sad. We were talking about the movie Chaplin, and apparently he had directed or coached this 3-minute scene that showed Edna and Charlie from the time that they first met, at the SNA, and just these little segments that showed you them evolving as a screen couple. And I was just like, wow. And it got cut.
He said that he had put together a scene where Chaplin is dressed in the outfit from The Cure and A Dog's Life. It makes you wonder, where is this footage? He said it was edited and he saw it, but why is that not on the DVD?
Yeah, it should be like in behind, like deleted scenes or something.
Exactly.
That would be great to see.
And those scenes that he coached Robert Downey Jr., most of them don't appear in the film because Robert Downey Jr. doesn't really show up as the tramp that much in the film.
He said that Attenborough wanted to focus more on the J. Edgar Hoover scandal stuff because he seemed to think, Attenborough seemed to think that would sell better than the artistry side of Chaplin. I disagree with him there. I feel like there's a healthy balance for both. But in a movie that's promoted and advertised to modern day audiences, even the audiences of 1992.
And then I last night went to Tampa and I saw Dan's Funny Bones show, and he showed the pawn shop and, dissected it, and there was much more people there, and there was children there, and to hear people laughing. I don't have the restored mutuals yet, but to see the restored pawn shop, it's gorgeous. The only thing for me personally is the music. It's not what I'm used to hearing, the Carl Davis score, but it was just great. And then afterwards, he was selling his book, which Nigel got and Dan autographed.
Why don't we do a little plug for Dan's book, too, before we get into the topic?
Yes.
If anybody's interested in checking out the book that he wrote on Chaplin.
The book is called Charlie Chaplin, Comedy in Motion. And it's an excellent book because it goes into such detail, but the way that Dan writes it, it makes it so easy to follow. You know, he talks about his costume, the way that he did his makeup. He takes 1 a.m. and he dissects it. And, you know, like the scene when he first shows up in the taxi. And there's things that he mentions in there, and watch it. I'm like, oh, I didn't even notice that. And he's such a great love of Charlie Chaplin. He himself is a mime. He's a magician. He's a physical comedian.
What I noticed was when he got up there, he has such a love and passion for Chaplin that it's undeniable. You know, when you see someone giving a presentation on something that they truly care about and are interested in, it comes off as so much more genuine.
And it intrigues you too. If it's something you don't know about, like Chaplin, I'd be all up in that. But if it's something you don't know about, but the person was super passionate about it, then it catches your interest and you want to hear and learn about something like that.
Even if it's something that you're not particularly interested in, like you said, if somebody else has a super huge passion for it, it almost makes anything interesting to another person. If you're interested in Dan Kamen's book, it is on Amazon, and it's called Charlie Chaplin, Comedy in Motion, and it's a really good book. And I got mine signed, fortunately.
And we're hoping maybe that Dan will come on the show and tell us about how he came to get interested in Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah.
Because he went to school, I can't remember exactly what he was going to college for, but then he watched the Gold Rush and his life went in a totally different direction.
That's what happened.
And that's what, yes, exactly. That's what Charlie Chaplin does. He takes your life in a different direction.
We'll go ahead and move on now to the primary discussion of today's episode, which is Charlie's leading ladies. Compare and contrast. We'll go through the list of them and try to figure out which were the best ones, because they're all kind of different. They're really hard to compare because they all play kind of different roles in the films.
Based on how Charlie wrote them.
Where else can you start but 1914? Mabel Normand, Max Sennett's girlfriend.
Yeah, and I like her a lot because to me she wasn't playing, she never played like a dainty woman. She was always like one of the guys, if anything, and she wasn't afraid to get like down and dirty. And because Chaplin was new to Keystone, it was more like he was like the leading man to her, if anything.
Well, when you think about it, Mabel was in films before Chaplin was.
She definitely was, yeah.
And from what I read, was that Mabel helped Charlie get comfortable in front of the camera. Because he, coming from the stage, coming from Fred Carno, he knew how to please a live audience, but he wasn't sure. He had a hard time at the beginning adapting to performing on camera, which is a completely different way of acting. Completely different, even back then.
Yeah.
And Mabel was a pro at that time, and she kind of took his talents that he had on stage and was able to help him adapt to take those same talents and make them work in front of a motion picture screen. So for that and that alone, Mabel Normand is owed a huge debt of gratitude from anybody who loves Chaplin.
For sure.
Now, also when you talk about Mabel Normand, it's interesting because, like you said, Sarah, she's almost one of the guys, you know. Once Chaplin got into SNA and he picked up Edna Purviance, all his other leading ladies, up until I would say Paulette Goddard. Paulette Goddard was almost kind of the next step from Mabel Normand. She was more of a Mabel Normand than anyone, I think, in between those two. Because she was almost on the same level as Charlie. And Mabel Normand was billed as the female Chaplin. When Chaplin hit his rise to popularity, and they were calling Mabel the female Chaplin, because she really was. In 1914, 1915, she really was the equivalent to him.
For sure.
Mabel and Charlie could play anything. They played a married couple, they played rivals. He was in films that she was the starring role in, and vice versa. So I feel like they were really even on that aspect. And of course, Mabel's Strange Predicament was the first film that featured Mabel and Charlie together. Right,
and he had to be part of like her stardom, and I think that because he noticed that she was so already like a big star as it was, he wanted that too by having his own control that she had, because she was able to direct her own films that Mac let her, and write her own films, and Chaplin's like, I want to do that too. I think I can. Even though he didn't have as much experience as Mabel, but he had an instinct.
The thing about Mabel is, yes, she made him more comfortable in front of the camera. One of the things Charlie had a hard time understanding was, you know, he was a star on the stage. Everybody knows that he was with Carno, but he was a star in Carno. When he left Carno, within weeks, they went back to England. They weren't getting, you know, the bookings. She made him feel, you know, comfortable, and, you know, he was used to the beginning, you know, you start and you end in that sequence. So film is done differently. Mm-hmm. But his little skits, or the things that he actually did, he brought that from his stage productions. Somebody has said that because there's a part in Mabel's married life where, you know, she's frustrated with her husband. He's a drunk. You know, she just brought this dummy, you know, this dummy, hoping that that'll teach him to fight, because apparently she was getting accosted in the park and he didn't come to, you know, to her aid. But she does a part in there where, you know, she's frustrated, you know, with her husband, and she does that little tramp walk. Mm-hmm. And some people have said that she taught him that tramp walk, and she didn't. Like, you know, that kind of stuff he brought from the stage. Right. You know,
I will say there's a couple scenes in some of the non-Chaplin Mabel Normand films. I know those exist too. And there's a thing where she puts her elbow down on a desk or a end table, and she misses it, and she almost falls. You know that thing that, you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
I know what you're talking about.
Right.
I think that might be a Keystone thing, actually. I don't think that's specific. Like, Mabel Normand absolutely was an original, but at the same time, she was molded into what Keystone wanted as a leading lady, as a comedian. For Keystone, there was the slapstick women comedians, and then there were, like, the bathing beauties that were just there to look pretty.
Well, she was both, though. She really was.
Yes, and she could do both effortlessly.
She was a model. Before she got into film, she was a model.
I did not know.
The Gibson Girl kind of, you know, ad for Coca-Cola, she did those.
Mm-hmm. She must have been young then, because she was only like in her early 20s when she was in Keystone.
I've seen her birth year as 1892, but somebody posted a picture of her, you know, her grave, the tombstone or whatever, and it has 1895.
You see,
so that would have made her 19. Yeah, so you know, she was young.
The problem with that is there aren't like a lot of reliable sources with birth years back then. There's this singer I really like named Marion Harris, who no one knows the correct year of birth, and even Al Jolson, he doesn't even know exactly when he was born.
Some say 1886, some say 1884. Yeah, it's all over the place.
The silent era, just nobody knows. There weren't like clear records yet.
Right.
And of course, everyone wanted to be younger than they were. Everybody promoted themselves as being younger.
Yeah.
To keep that fame and stardom going as long as possible.
And that's still going on today.
Although it's harder to hide it now.
Yes.
It is harder to hide it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you look at Mabel at the Wheel.
Yeah.
Where Charlie plays the villain and Mabel's the hero of the film. And that's just a really interesting, cool film just for that aspect, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Right. My favorite film with him is his Trysting Place. They were so believable because there's couples like that. They're fighting one minute and making out the next, and you could sense that in them. Charlie played a father, a husband and a father, I think twice as the tramp. The other one was a little small role in A Day's Pleasure. Yeah. And, of course, Monsieur Verdoux, he played it. But he was a husband and a father, and they were just so believable as just this couple, and she get frustrated at him. And, I mean, that movie's funny enough with, the baby. He's holding it by his jumper, and I like that one a lot.
I feel like Mabel doesn't get enough credit in her own right. I mean, you know, it's easy to look at her and think of her as a Chaplin co-star, a Chaplin leading lady, but she had her own completely different career.
Her own career,
you know,
yeah.
her own thing going on. It's just sad because a lot of her films are gone, or they haven't been really restored, and that's a name that I feel like is going to slowly disappear from conversation because of that.
Bad.
Not if her nephew, her great nephew, has anything to do about it. Stephen Normand. He really promotes Mabel. But, you know, it also goes into, you know, and I mentioned before, Hollywood, you know, they seem to think they started in 1930. And you know how there was always a conversation about there's not enough women get nominated or Oscars for being a director in you know, our modern time. But women in the silent era were doing that.
Yeah.
They were directors and producers. They did it all. But because we're not acknowledging that part of Hollywood, you know, saying, oh, there's not enough women, you know, directors, but there was many of them. Mabel Normand, Mary Pickford, you know.
The thing that bothers me about Mabel is that if her only claim to fame now in this generation is the Mac and Mabel show, that's fine, but it's so incorrect, you know, as far as a lot of the history is concerned. I feel like as time goes on that the Mac and Mabel version of her story is going to be the one that people believe is the truth versus what actually is the truth. And I know that there was a book that came out a while back that was about Mabel and supposedly her life story. And I've just heard there's so many inaccuracies in that book.
Charlie thought the world of Mabel. I mean, he really, you know, he really liked her. And fortunately, he had to be a pawn, what do you call them at the funeral? The casket, you know, how you carry the this casket, you know, when she died at 37. But he thought the world of Mabel.
Is there any record of her voice recorded?
Not that
I've heard. I mean, I guess the person, like, if we could ever get Stephen Normand to pop on over, he would definitely be the person that, you know, could give so much information about Mabel.
Yeah, if you watch the film she made with Roscoe Arbuckle, He Did and He Didn't. Have you ever seen that? That's a fantastic movie, and it's something.
Mabel Normand and Fatty Arbuckle were a good couple. They worked so well together. Better than
Mabel Adrift is so cute.
I think.
Yeah.
If you have the forgotten films of Fatty Arbuckle, she's in a lot of those with him, and it's just a testament to show how well she was on screen, and that's why it kills me that she's not talked about more than she is in this day and age. But hopefully that will change, because we're certainly doing our part. And the Keystone set, the Max Sennett set that was just released, has quite a few Mabel films on it that are restored. So hopefully they get her name out there and more of her films are rescued. Didn't one of her movies go into the registry not too long ago?
I'm not... Oh, I need to check that. I don't know which one it is.
No, it was one where she dresses up like a boy. She's working in an office and she gets fired, so she comes back dressed as a boy, and then the boss's wife is hitting on her. So I feel like even in that era, they're really pushing some topics there.
Yeah.
Probably the reason why it got in there, because of the gender switching roles that it makes fun of.
Yeah.
And back in 1913, you know, that's some pretty heavy stuff to be making fun of. All right, so we talked about Mabel.
Yeah,
Chaplin's...
to segue into another keystone leading lady of Chaplin's would be Marie Dressler, and the film that's very prominent, and it's the first, I believe, comedy feature film, Tilly's Punctured Romance. And Chaplin doesn't play the tramp in that at all. He just plays like a con man, and Marie Dressler is just way over the top, but it works for that film, I believe. And to me, she reminds me a lot of Melissa McCarthy today, who is just like really over the top and hilarious and funny.
Yeah,
they're just very similar.
Very funny.
So I really like that film a lot. And there's a lot going on, and Chaplin's actually cheating on Tilly with Mabel Normand. A little silly, but it's a great film. Great, like, first comedy feature film.
Marie Dressler was making the unheard of amount of $2,500 a week.
Holy moly.
And that film was in production, I think, for 2 months. And the thing is, at the time, I think it was done between April and June.
Oh,
that's the information that I got off of James Nybar's book. But in the middle of that, he still was having to pump out his own little, keystones. So she was getting 2,500, and Charlie was getting about 150, and I'm sure Mabel was probably getting somewhere in the same ballpark. But she apparently Marie Dressler was a big star on the stage.
Yeah.
And that's how Max Sennett figured her name could bring people in. Because it was a big feature, it was 6 reels, and I guess he figured that he needed a name to pull them in. Meantime, by that time he had Charlie Chaplin, but I don't think he knew it at that time. But yeah, she was making that, and she's supposed to get a cut of the film, and something happened with that. Unfortunately, after they released that film, every other time, like they did in a lot of films that Charlie was not the star of, he became the star of the film. Like, in other words, when it got reissued, if you look at the posters, Marie's down here, down at the bottom, and it's, Charlie Chaplin and Mabel Normand. They stole that movie.
Marie Dressler's comedy doesn't really translate that well now. It's really dated.
It's boisterous versus Chaplin, who just plays it as subtly as he can. Keystone doesn't want that. They want big. But
it goes to show you how Chaplin really brought something different to the game when he started making movies. Because if Marie Dressler was the example of what film acting was in the early days of film, when you compare it to what Charlie's doing, it's like night and day.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that frustrated the hell out of Max Sennett, because Max Sennett had his own way. The Keystone Cops, like, they were very frantic and running around and mugging, and here's Charlie just doing it his own way, subtle. But that contrast is what drew people to him. They're like, everybody else is going crazy, and there's this guy, and he's just like, you had to watch him because his movements were subtle, and the rest of chaos, behind him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right that Marie Dressler, was the star on stage. So apparently that's what modern day comedy was.
That was.
You look at it now, you're like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was Tilly's Punctured Romance was based off of a play called Tilly's Nightmare.
Right.
Which is what was adapted from the stage into the film, the feature film. And it's cool because at the end, in the restored Keystone set that had just come out, they put back the scene where at the beginning the actors come out from behind the curtain and introduce themselves, and then they segue into their costumes, what they look like in the film, and then at the end they come out and they take a bow from the front of the stage, like it's a play.
I love that ending. It's because it's actually they're breaking out of character, and you could see, that they really liked each other. That came across to me, when they broke out of character and came from behind the curtain. That was very sweet, and it's not in every issue.
I wonder if the end of Tilly's Nightmare, the stage show, had the Keystone Cops in it. Something tells me that they added that in just because.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
It was expected at Senate to have the Keystone frantic chase scene at the end of the film.
A trademark.
So we leave Keystone, 1914. Charlie goes over to the S&A studios and hires an actress who we could probably dedicate an entire couple episodes to, but we'll try to condense it as best we can for this one. Edna Purviance.
Yes. She was in very many of his films, starting with S&A, going all the way, 1915, going all the way to about 1923. What was her last film with him? A
Woman of Paris?
Yeah, which was just something new for her. It wouldn't be a Chaplin film, it'd be something for her to start her career.
That was his attempt. A Woman of Paris was his attempt to get her into stardom on her own without being in a Charlie Chaplin film, I think.
Yeah, and also allowing him to make a drama, which was not something he ever did before.
A Woman of Paris was critically praised. The critics loved it. The problem is people expect to see Charlie Chaplin in a Charles Chaplin film.
Exactly.
And
he is in it.
Edna Purviance
he does have one little scene in it, but you don't even know that it's him unless you read about it.
He carries a bag over his back, and that's it. That's all he does. It's very short.
Edna Purviance was in another Charlie Chaplin film that never got to see the light of day. It was called Seagulls.
Yeah.
And Charlie had director Joseph von Strasberg, who was famous for Marlene Dietrich films.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, and apparently Charlie seen it, you know, after it was done. He didn't like it, and he never had it released. And the only copy purportedly was burned in 1933.
Ugh.
It was to offset some tax issues that he was having. Joseph von Strasberg claimed that at that point he was saying that Edna Purviance had a drinking problem, and that in order to get her to act, you know, he would give her alcohol. And then some people say that
never heard of that before.
Edna needed. Now I'm just saying what I've heard. I'm not stating that. And some people felt that Edna needed Charlie to direct her, like, you know, the fact that, you know, he wasn't directing her. And then I think in 1927, she did a French film that is lost. Anything about Edna Purviance, the person to go and see would be Linda Wada, and she's got a Facebook page, Chaplin's Leading Lady, on Edna.
Just as Mabel's name gets a little lost when it comes to history, if anyone is subject to this, I would say, unfortunately, Edna Purviance is not a name that you really hear about anymore. Unless you're a hardcore Chaplin fan, there's not a whole lot of people who really know who she is. And that's something that Linda tries to fix. She dedicates her life to promoting Edna's name, even outside the Chaplin world, just as her own entity, as her own individual. And she had such an interesting story. Edna Purviance had no history in films in 1915. Chaplin hired her completely
out of the blue.
Out of the blue. She was what, a secretary initially?
Yeah, she was a secretary. She was like 19 years old.
So Chaplin took her and molded her into a leading lady that could work in his films, because Charlie didn't like people that had prior experience in films. He wanted to take somebody who was fresh, had no experience, and mold them in his style.
I believe that Charlie Chaplin never would have attained what he did without her by his side in that period, you know, especially in the S&A and the mutuals. She was, to me, it was his greatest leading lady. They had unimaginable screen presence, the two of them, and no other actress ever was able to just attain that. It was natural. Yes, you can't create that. It just is, and she's just amazing.
And they have a little relationship going while they worked together too. And long after they stopped working together, he still managed to keep her on the payroll up until her death in the 1950s, which shows how loyal he was to her and how much they meant to each other. And it really shows you how much he appreciated everything she did for him.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that was his acknowledgement that she was a part of his early success. Is it his biography? Is it Charlie's biography or David Robinson's that talks about when she went to screen test in Monsieur Verdoux for that part of Madame Grosnay? And he said that he felt a tinge of sadness because it was nostalgia, her being there, but at that time he was getting into a lot of trouble, you know, with you know, the communist thing in the 40s, and she reminded him of that time in his life that was beautiful and carefree, and
like 30 years.
Well, he said that the mutual period was his most beloved personally.
Yeah,
it was the best point of his career because it was before the scandals started creeping in. and he had almost complete control of everything. Even when he went to his own studio, you know, he had to worry about the headaches of owning his own studio.
Yeah.
So Mutual was kind of this perfect blend where he worked for a studio. He was still making a lot of money, but he worked for a studio that kind of let him do whatever that he wanted.
Yep.
Right.
And he was young, and he had all these new ideas, and he was able to crank all this stuff out. He had a great supporting cast with Edna and Eric Campbell.
Eric Campbell, yeah.
So, I mean, I can completely understand why he would consider that the best part of his entire career, even though he would go on later to make all those amazing feature films. To have the nostalgia for the early days when he was working with Edna at the beginning, I can completely understand that.
And the funny thing is, whenever, like, they would do a scene and Edna would mess up or laugh and it would ruin the scene and they had to start over. Chaplin never held it against her. He would just laugh it off too. But if anyone else in his company did that, he would not let them forget it.
Right, yes.
So what caused Charlie to decide to move past Edna? He tried to get her own feature film starring role in A Woman of Paris, but after that nothing really happened with her, and he moved on.
I think I read it in his autobiography that she was maturing. She looked older and didn't have that youthful face that she used to have in 1915. And he just wanted a very sensitive, young face, fresh face. And also she was moving on in her life, too, and wasn't that interested in making movies anymore.
So it was a mutual agreement, pretty much.
Oh, that's funny. Mutual agreement.
This is what Charlie said about the mutual period. I just grabbed it. I should know it off the top of my head. He says, fulfilling the mutual contract, I suppose, was the happiest period in my career. I was light and unencumbered, 27 years old, with fabulous prospects and a friendly, glamorous world before me.
Aw.
And and you know, the Tramp is young and youthful. And yes, Edna, you know, and it's funny though, women appeared to look older years ago because she was only 23, and that's young. But women always looked older, and I don't know if it was the hairdo or the clothes.
Yeah.
But there was a marked difference between when she was 19 in 1915 and then she was 27 in 1923.
Yeah.
As she looked more, they call it matronly. So that's why he needed, younger, actresses. But
what would you say your favorite film with Edna and Charlie is?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Oh, Burlesque on Carmen.
Really? Oh,
that end. Oh, that end.
A great one. Mine would be The Immigrant, actually.
Oh, yes, that's sweet. Yes, the end of it. Yes, it is. It's a sweet film.
I just love their chemistry in it. It's very genuine.
And it's 34 films that you have to try and pick from. Yeah.
I would say that I agree about The Immigrant and Burlesque on Carmen. I can see both of those. I would say Easy Street, definitely.
Oh, yes.
Easy Street's good.
The beginning of that film, when he sees her in the church and all that, it just really sums up their partnership in a really, really good way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Jumping back, since we talked about Mabel already, what would you say your favorite film with Mabel Normand and Charlie was?
Oh, that's...
His Trysting Place. That's my favorite.
I would also say Tilly's Punctured Romance. I just like the chaos of the love triangle going on.
Yeah.
I'd have to say Mabel at the Wheel, because Charlie is the villain and Mabel is the hero, and you don't get to see that very often. It's a unique film.
And especially for a woman, and actually back then, I don't even know, people frowned on women driving, so that was probably for a modern day audience that was like, you know, she was just so cutting edge for her time, Mabel Normand. And I think she was the same way personally. You know, Mabel just did her own thing. She didn't adhere to being in the box, and that's really cool because that was a lot harder to do then than it is now.
Yeah.
So we move past Edna Purviance. He makes A Woman of Paris in 1923, and Edna, after that film, Edna kind of moves on and does her own thing. we get to the Gold Rush in 1925.
25.
Now, why don't we go in depth to talk about what almost happened?
Well, he cast his new wife, Lita Gray, who he had originally had in The Kid as just like a little like supporting angel in the film. She was like 12 in that. And so in 1925, she was 16, and she was going to play the lead character in The Gold Rush. However, Chaplin got her pregnant, so he had to recast. Oops. So he recast with Georgia Hale instead. And Georgia Hale is really the archetype of what Chaplin wanted. And even though she was just replacing Lita Gray, I think it worked out really well in the end. I can't really imagine Lita doing it.
If I might add about Lita Gray, when Raleigh Totherell shot the screenshot, you know, to see how she would look on film, Raleigh thought that just because of how her face, she had a kind of a broad face.
Yeah.
He didn't think that she was really good for that role, and there was a couple other people. Of course, Charlie wanted her.
Yeah.
And I think the only other person in his little entourage that was like, oh yeah, she looks great, was Henry Bergman. And someday maybe we could go on about his stock company.
Yeah.
Henry Bergman was like Charlie's yes man. But yeah, people didn't think that she was suitable for that role, but Charlie got whatever, you know, he won, and yeah.
When it comes to Lita Gray, outside of the films that she made with Chaplin, she really didn't do a whole lot of other stuff.
There's this film, I guess if I IMDb, I could find it. Like in 1959, she was in some kind of cult film. Talk among yourselves and let me see if I can find it. But yeah, she did a lot of vaudeville. After she got divorced, she did like a stage show where she sang, and she billed herself as Mrs. Charlie Chaplin.
Well, yeah. That was a typical thing. Even after they got divorced, she used the Chaplin name to get herself roles in films and stuff.
Did that?
And yeah. And
Mildred did that too, actually. Mildred Harris's first wife.
But Lita Gray was married 4 times and still called herself Lita Gray Chaplin.
Oh.
You know,
it's the notability of the name.
Yes.
So Georgia Hale.
Georgia Hale, who was the true leading lady of the Gold Rush. I like her a lot in that, and he almost recast her for City Lights when things weren't working out with his leading lady for that. But anyways, with the Gold Rush, she is very demure. She's not like Edna at all. She isn't very sweet. She's kind of a flirt, but in like a mean kind of way.
But she's playing a prostitute, so that
she is, or a dance hall girl, as they would prefer to nickname her.
Yeah.
But she's very beautiful, and I love the dress she wears throughout the film, and the fur coats, but in the end, she appears to be just a gold digger, play on words there, because Chaplin gets rich, and she only wants him because of the money.
He doesn't think that, but yeah, that's, you know.
He's a little oblivious and naive to the fact of that, but if he's happy, then, if the tramp's happy, then I'm happy.
Then there's that whole thing, and we've discussed before, about the end of the Gold Rush, the silent version, the narrated version. And I've often wondered, like, you know, what did she really think about him cutting? That is a pivotal scene. As the leading lady, to have that scene cut from the film. But now it's back, so.
Good. And the film doesn't feel complete without that scene, because in the narrated version, it's just like them walking up the stairs, and it looks like it's going to segue into something else, which it obviously does in the silent film. But he just like cuts it out, and he gives his concluding remarks, and that's over, and it's over.
And then he tweaked her storyline too, but
yeah, she's a much more likable person in the 1942 re-edit of the Gold Rush than she is in the 1925 original cut. Charlie. The way he re-edited the film, and the way he narrates her backstory and what she's doing makes her seem like a much, much more likable person. I don't know, what if he felt bad about it later on?
Yeah.
I guess he just looked at the tramp and said, oh my God, he's so pathetic. So actually, when he tweaked her storyline, he didn't make himself look like as much of a fool. Because like in the 1925 version, you know, when she's in the cabin and she's inviting herself to dinner, but there's one where she winks to the other girl and like they're making fun of him, and it's like sad, and it doesn't show that much in the narrated version, the way that he, you know, tweaked it. And of course, in the original version, she clearly tells Jack she loves him.
Yeah.
You know, so you know that she loves him, and yet she's taking the tramp. It was more for just fun. Like, I guess it was boring up there, and they're like, oh, let's make fun of this guy.
And I think that she was also using him to make Jack jealous.
Right,
and
right.
There's when in the scene where Chaplin realizes he's been stood up and he goes to the saloon or whatever it's called to look in the window and be all sad on New Year's.
Oh,
and then she and her friends are like, let's go see the tramp. Let's go visit him. And they all go, Jack included, like, let's give him a scare. And they realize, like, oh, he really put a lot of thought into this.
Right. Yeah. That you could see that was genuine. That she realized that, you know, they were making fun of him and that he really wanted to make them dinner. And yeah.
Yeah. And he saved up a lot of money. He like shoveled sidewalks.
Yeah.
Great scene. But the thing I like about the scene where she discovers like the really nice dinner that he had put together is when Jack goes in to kiss her, and Chaplin made her do that scene dozens of times because he wanted a genuine reaction, and that slap is real. That wasn't put in the script at all because she was just so fed up of being kissed by Jack that she slapped him, and Chaplin loved it, and that was the end of it.
Now, Georgia went on to write a book about Charlie and her life. I haven't read it personally. Have you, Anne?
I have.
Yeah. The title, you know, I'm not gonna lie. I seen the title and I'm like, oh, all right, you know, like it's some juicy details, and it was almost like she was in a relationship with him, but then she was also trying to portray herself as Chase, you know, and I'm thinking, you're with Charlie Chaplin. I'm thinking he's not going to hang out with you for 5 years. And, you know, the end of it to me is disturbing because she claims that the night before he married Una Chaplin, that he went to her house apartment and was begging her to leave. Like, he just wanted to escape. And, you know, at that time he was getting mired with the FBI stuff. And so he wanted her to leave and just them to run away. And she kept putting him off and saying, tomorrow, Charlie, tomorrow. And he's like, please. So he leaves. And then the next day, because they were going to leave that morning, and the next day she found out that he married Una Chaplin.
Oh.
Then there's this whole other chapter where she's imagining they're in some fairyland, and it's just really hard to follow. And then I thought to myself, I'm like, this woman's a bit of a flame.
Here's the thing about Georgia Hale that I think about is, outside of Chaplin, I don't think she really had a lot of other things to discuss. I mean, I think no one would really be interested in hearing her life story outside of the stuff she was involved with Chaplin. Right. So I almost feel like she took it upon herself to stretch the truth a little bit to make her story a little juicier.
Right. And like I was mentioning that book by Kevin Brownlow, In Search of Charlie Chaplin. And he talks about making Unknown Chaplin. And it's an excellent book. It really is. It talks about these two men, with David Gill and Kevin Brownlow, went through the tortures of the damned to get that on the screen. But he talks about Georgia Hale and trying to get her for an interview. And she kept giving him the slip and giving him the runaround. And he talks about when he finally got to see her, you know, he was describing costume she's wearing, you know, in the interview, in the actual Unknown Chaplin. And it was just kind of humorous the way that he was describing it. But when I heard about her giving him the runaround, I'm like, she's a flake. That's just my, whatever. But yeah.
Well, since we're talking about autobiographies, we might as well mention that Lita wrote 2 books as well.
Whoa, yeah.
Yeah, of course she did. Doesn't surprise me at all.
Now, I read the first one, but it's been a long time. She wrote a second one later on, and I can't imagine that she'd have much more to say, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't understand how there would have been a need for a second book.
Okay. The second book I have not read, but what I have heard, and it's by Jeffrey Vance, and unfortunately, before it ever got to print, she had passed away. So it's not a very big book, and a big part of it is the divorce complaint that's in there, which is salacious, for that time period.
Yes.
And supposedly she was going to try and make amends for the first book, because she's saying that when she wrote the book in 1966, okay, this was after Charlie Chaplin's autobiography, where he didn't mention her name and barely gave their entire time.
Very considerate of him to not talk too much about it, because he clearly doesn't want any bad blood anymore.
Especially because at that time his sons were both alive, so he didn't want to say anything about their mother that would be hurtful.
So I think the book she wrote, My Life with Chaplin, I think it was kind of payback. I mean, that's just my opinion. I mean, she's saying that she didn't know that this salacious stuff was going to be in there, but I'm thinking, you're pushing 60, okay? At that time she was 58, and you've been married 4 times. It's not like, to coin a modern expression, it's not like you're new to the rodeo. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That book is steamy. It's just like, whoa. She really goes into detail.
Yeah.
Goodness.
I don't know actually what went on behind, they were a married couple, and possibly a lot of that was true, but it's just that it was written like it's almost soft porn, some of it, the way that it gets into, graphic details.
I remember being really surprised reading that. I think I was in high school still, and I found that book at a thrift store. I found that book at a thrift store for like $3, and I was like, oh, this is cool. And I picked it up, and the cool thing was, whoever had the book previously, there were news clippings and things, Chaplin-related news clippings from when he won his Oscar, and something about his children that they had clipped out of the newspaper and stuck inside that book. So when I bought the book, I opened it up, there was all these cool old newspaper
That's so cool.
articles. But yeah, the book is really, really, really steamy, and it's funny because, even though you may not be sure if all of it is 100% true, it's, you can't help it when you look at Chaplin and watch his movies. You're thinking about now all those things that his ex-wives say in those books. It just gives you a different perspective on The Little Tramp.
Yeah.
I mean, and yes, he was 100% totally wrong to ever get involved with her. But the way that she presents herself in the first book is like she kind of knew when she was going to visit him up in the big house or, his place, but it's a salacious book, and
it almost makes you wonder if her mother knew, knew exactly what was going on and used it to her advantage.
Yes.
Her mother was involved in that relationship from the beginning.
Yes.
Now, if I recall the book correctly, didn't Charlie meet Lita when she was like 3 or 4 years old?
That's correct, yeah.
Yes.
They were at a restaurant or something?
Yep.
Lita said that it was her birthday, and she was, apparently her family's from that area, long generations in that area of California. And I think she said it was her birthday, and her mother took her for, a little party or whatever. And Charlie was there with some other people from Keystone, and he was in his tramp costume. The thing I found interesting, Lita Gray did an interview, and she was talking about that particular thing. And she was talking about the makeup. And I found it interesting that she said that the makeup was actually pink. It wasn't white, the grease paint. I found that interesting. But anyway, the mother brought Lita over to meet Charlie, and he scared her, because of his costume, and she, went running. She went running away, But yeah, that was a sweet story.
Yeah.
Well, Edna passed away pretty early, but you can only imagine what a book that she wrote would have been like.
Oh, I wish.
And that's why I have so much respect for her, because she could have made a lot of money, because she knew Charlie from 1915, and there's things that went on between them, and she was just, a very, private person. But it was, and then Lita Gray had her own issues. She became an alcoholic. Of course, Charlie got blamed for that, but I don't know if you can blame somebody for somebody, having, an affliction or whatever, but
well, that's a vice, everybody has stress in their lives. Everybody goes through difficult things in their lives. And the people that decide to become an alcoholic or become a chain smoker, and they want to blame the whole world for that problem, everybody goes through problems, and it's all how you deal with it. And the people that choose to turn to alcohol and drugs to assist in those problems, it really doesn't make the problem any better. It just distracts you from the problem. It takes you away from the problem. And I'm not just talking about Lita, obviously, or anybody. I'm just talking about in general. It's so easy for people to find outside, things to blame their vices on. So it wasn't just her,
Right.
Hollywood's full of people like that.
Yeah. So to get back on track with the leading ladies.
Sorry.
That's good, Sarah, because I could have went on about this, but good. Yeah, rein me in.
Well, we haven't escaped Lita Gray 100%, because as we go on from the gold rush into the circus,
yes,
Merna Kennedy, who was best friends with Lita Gray. So Chaplin didn't stray too far.
No, he did not. And of course, to get back into the scandals, apparently he had an affair with Merna Kennedy while he was still married to her best friend Lita Gray. Anyways, Merna Kennedy in the circus. I really like her. She's very delicate. She's very feminine. She gets pushed around a lot by the ringmaster, who is also her father. But she does the role very well. She's like what is she, like a ballerina or something like that?
Equestrian, like a horse, doing acrobats on the horse.
And she's very beautiful. And of course, the tramp is in love with her, and you think they're like gonna get together. Like he even like gets that weird like pinky ring from a fellow clown. However, as soon as he does, she meets a tightrope walker who she like falls for instantly. Love at first sight, as they say. And it gets just really sad at the end. Of course, he lets them get married to save her. The best thing about the tramp later on is that he always like sacrifices his happiness,
right?
Others, which is what I really admire about him. And he, of course, lets them go on their way, and he is off to a new adventure in the end. Kind of on that melancholy, lonely.
And it's one of his most beautiful endings of any of his films. It's just gorgeous. And the thing too is that, I mean, most people that know about Charlie Chaplin know about that time period in his life, the divorce and the fire, and
he was on like he almost had like a mental breakdown.
Yes,
like going through the divorce, and even the production of the was really tough for him because the set burned down. Some like local high school kids stole a bunch of the, I think, train set or something.
Right, so and film got destroyed in a laboratory that they had shot some film, and it went to a laboratory and it got scratched. And supposedly, from what I remember reading, a lot of that was a tightrope, he had done, and they shot it. And so it was mired from, and then of course the divorce. Then the tax problems came up, and
just imagine him going through the divorce with Lita Gray, while at the same time using her best friend as the leading lady in the film he's currently making. I mean, that had to open up some awkward tensions.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it did. That whole time period, and the end of the circus, the way that he filmed it, and he picked the morning light his face looks so old. I mean,
Yeah,
it just, oh.
You can really see him age in the circus.
Yes, yes.
He only, because that's when he first started dyeing his hair black to continue to play the tramp. However, he only dyed the front half of his hair, leaving the back of his head stark gray, and it just looks so bad. Oh man.
Yeah.
I just feel so bad for him. Like, oh, you could just tell he was going through all that really aged him, and he wasn't even 40 yet. Like, oh
no,
man.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So we wrap up the circus. I don't think there's a whole lot to say about Merna Kennedy, really. She didn't write any books or anything about him, did she?
Not that.
She died at 44 of a heart attack, which is kind of sad.
I was going to say,
36.
what was her career? What was her career after the circus?
Who knows? Like, I certainly don't.
She did a few films, but nothing that is memorable. She died at the age of 36.
She was in a bunch of talkies in the 30s, but like she just stopped after 1934. She didn't do much. Oh, I didn't know. Apparently, Merna Kennedy was married to Busby Berkeley, who made all of those gold digger movies in the 1930s. Gold Diggers in 1933, 34. So Busby Berkeley had a really good career, but she was only married to him for like a year.
Wow. You know, I recall reading that, but it's something I kind of had forgotten about, too.
I did not know that,
So would you consider Merna Kennedy to be the least memorable of all of Charlie's leading lady co-stars?
I would say maybe of the features up until the Great Dictator, I'd say that.
Yeah.
Because after the Great Dictator, the leading ladies are kind of hard to identify because you don't really know who they are, other than like Claire Bloom, who we'll get to later.
Yeah.
Right, like Monsieur Verdoux, there's like a lot. Yeah, I see your point. There's too many
Monsieur Verdoux.
Yeah. Well, I'm speaking mainly of just like the tramp films.
The least effective, I think. Yeah.
Definitely of the features, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you wonder if he tried to get Georgia Hale to play? Because he seemed to really like her in The Gold Rush. I'm surprised he didn't attempt to make her the lead in The Circus as well.
Maybe she was doing something else at the time. Cause
he dropped his contract with her. He just never re-signed her again.
Well, he tried to bring her back. He tried to bring her back in City Lights, though. So that made me wonder if maybe she was always on the phone. She was always kind of there, just in case he had to fall back.
Yeah.
That would have been a disaster. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. I mean, her in the role of the blind girl, you know.
Yeah. Going on, I think it's important to talk about City Lights now because City Lights was a very long production. It was like, 3 years or something like that?
From December 1927 to...
1951.
Yeah, it was.
Like 3 or 4 years. And he cast Virginia Cherrill as the blind flower girl. And that was the first leading lady he didn't have any romantic relationship with at all. Because they didn't really get along at all, actually. But I honestly can't imagine anyone else playing that role. She fits so well for it. However, they didn't work well together, which is why he never cast her again.
Charlie, also, this is the first blonde girl since Edna.
That's right.
The thing is, though, is as far as Virginia Cheryl, like when you watched Unknown Chaplain and she was like, we didn't like each other, you know, the whole thing. But there's a picture of her from 1933 or 32, and it's a picture because she had married Cary Grant, and she's in her living room. And it's one of those magazine, you know, fashion magazines. And there's a picture of Charlie on her mantle, you know, and...
Even though she didn't really like him, I think she had a respect for him as a filmmaker.
She went to the, and it's in David Robinson's book, in one, you know, the end where he lists like every little thing. And she went to The Great Dictator, you know, on the set, and she actually drove him home. And I heard something that she wanted a copy of The Great Dictator to show to the, you know, British soldiers, and Charlie wouldn't give it to her or something. And that I often wonder myself if that kind of like, you know, really upset her, and that's why, you know, she went on to say that they didn't get along. I mean, the only thing he ever mentions about her, and it's not even her name, he calls her the girl, you know, in his autobiography. He talks about filming that scene, you know, where he first meets her. And, you know, he pretty much said that he was going a little crazy himself, you know, that he was driving himself nuts, you know, trying to do it, and that it wasn't the girl's fault. But
he snapped on her one day because,
oh yeah,
you know,
she wanted to get her hair done or something.
Yeah.
She asked Charlie if she could come back late or something because she had a hair appointment.
Oh,
and he flipped out. He sent her home, sent everybody home. Because that's the thing, you know, Chaplin could keep you waiting all day on the set while he was trying to think of ideas and come up with something. But if you kept him waiting, especially, you know, a female co-star at that time, 1931, he was the most powerful filmmaker in Hollywood.
Definitely.
Asking him to delay his creative vision so you could go get your hair done, you know, or get something to eat. You know, that's like the last thing he wanted to hear, especially as stressed out as he was during this making of City Lights, due to the fact he wasn't sure City Lights was going to sell because it was a silent film in 1931.
Yeah. Because at the time he started filming it, it was already 1927. The Jazz Singer had already been released, and his movie hadn't been, The Circus hadn't been released until 1928. So he was far behind in adapting to the new talkie era, which is obviously the norm now.
Well, in 1928, though, I mean, it was still almost kind of acceptable to make a silent. Because that was only a year after the talkies really started getting going. But when you think about 1931, other films that came out in 31, Dracula, Frankenstein, you know, All Quiet on the Western Front, I think came out in 1930. But you had all these talkies that were really starting to develop on the screen, and nobody but Chaplin could have gone and made a silent film in 1931, and it had success with it. And Charlie wasn't even sure at that time if this film would be a success. He even considered making it a talkie at one point.
Right. There's one part in Unknown Chaplain that Virginia Cherrill kind of sums it up, and she says, she's talking about that incident where she wanted her hair done and he fired her, and she's like, you forget, he was a god. I mean, you know, that's, you know, whatever he wanted, he got. There was nobody's opinion mattered more than Charlie Chaplin's. And that's kind of summed up the fact that he definitely would fire her for a hair appointment. But that struck me so amusing. She's like, you forget, he was a god. It was like,
he could do whatever he wanted. And when he did fire her, like briefly, and had Georgia Hale do some screen tests with the final scene with the recognition.
Well, hold on. Well, let's explain first what happened with that. So he got fed up with Virginia Cherrill. He fired her.
Yes, he did.
And he attempted to get Georgia Hale, the leading lady from the Gold Rush, to come back. And his initial plan was to reshoot all of the scenes with the blind girl with Georgia Hale. But even he realized, because the film had been in production for so long, even he had realized that at that point in time, that was impossible to go back and refilm everything with a different actress and get this film out, which he had been working on at that time for, 3.5 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and there exists screen tests of Georgia Hale playing the blind girl, and it just doesn't work. I mean, we are spoiled because we can't think of anyone but Virginia Cherrill playing the blind girl. So if we didn't know anything else, maybe it would have been acceptable. But
she was mocking him. That's how I took it. She was mocking the tramp, like making fun of him. Where Virginia at the end, I don't see it as...
Not too different from what she did in the Gold Rush then when you think about it.
Right. Virginia was looking at Charlie the Tramp and the Newsboys. She was looking at it like amusingly, but the way I took it, Georgia Hale's screen test, she winked at the girl in the flower shop, and it was just mocking him. And yeah, it just gave it a different feel.
Even if she didn't mean to do it that way, that's just the way she was. That's just the way she was portraying that character. It wasn't necessarily on purpose, I don't think.
Right. No, you're right. That was just her style, but that's how I took it, and it just changed it. I really felt bad for him, and where Virginia was amused watching that scene with the newsboys, it to me is amusing. It's like they grabbed the thing from his back pocket. He's going to kick him in the ass. So it's amusing. But yeah,
it wasn't like she was making fun of him. It was a little bit of like pitying, but it wasn't like complete mocking. It was just like, oh, isn't that kind of funny? But I'm not going to like be mean to him or anything. That's what Virginia came off as, and it worked very well. And then as soon as she recognizes him with definitely the best Chaplin scene of all time, if you ask me, where she realizes it's him and he has the flower up against his face, just smiling because he knows he can never have her.
It's strange. A lot of people debate the ending as far as, I don't know, I'm sappy. I look at it as she accepted him. Like, eventually she accepted him. She didn't reject him. But most people
accepts or rejects him. She's just like, that's not what I imagined.
She's in shock. She doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And it was brilliant of Chaplin to end it there because it leaves it open to everyone's imagination as to what happened.
Yeah.
Right.
Open to, because obviously she's grateful for everything he did for her. He stole money for her, for God's sakes. Oh, well, sort of. It was given to him by that drunk millionaire.
So, as we move along here, Virginia Cherrill, what else did she go on to do besides marry Cary Grant?
You stole the words out of my mouth.
Sorry.
I don't know. Virginia Cherrill made a couple more movies, but nothing like, it says partial. But I don't really know what she did afterwards. She married a few more men, and she lived to be 88 years old, so that's cool.
And she's in Unknown Chaplain as well. She's one that they were lucky enough to get a hold of to do interviews on.
Definitely.
And that wasn't an easy one either.
Yeah.
How so?
She was giving them the slip too. You have to read that book. I mean, it's really so insightful. I mean, I'm not demanding that you read it. I'm just saying that it just is a perfect accompaniment to the documentary.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. We're going to do a second part because there's just so much more to talk about, and we'll get into Paulette Goddard and his leading ladies of the 40s and 50s. But we'll go ahead and open it up to the Facebook page. We'll post a question. Who do you think was Charlie's best leading lady? And what scene do you think really stands out as far as Chaplin and his leading ladies? And which film?
And if that leading lady has more than one film with Chaplin, which film do you like her the most in?
But maybe, I mean, if we took Edna out of that, because I just have a strange feeling that she's going to get it hands down.
Yeah, true.
If you took Edna out, then you could really have a...
Okay, what about this? Other than Edna Purviance.
Right, yeah, I mean, just put it out there, yeah.
Chaplin leading lady. If you do like Edna, what is your favorite film with her?
That's perfect, Sarah. That's perfect, yeah. Because if you put Edna in there...
one of these.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much for listening, and be sure to check out part 2 when we get into the later co-stars. Paulette Goddard will probably be on for a while, because there's a lot to talk about regarding her.
2 films, yeah.
So thanks for listening, and check out the Facebook page, and we'll read some of the best comments on the next episode. So thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.